Hello everyone, and welcome back to my Gravity Falls build series. So far in Animal Crossing, we have built the Mystery Shack, the Northwest Manor, Lil Gideon's house, Seuss's house, and Greasy's Diner, and today we are moving on with our sixth build, which will be the Author's Bunker. If anyone knows how to prepare for an apocalypse, it's Ford. He has plenty of experience when it comes to the whole end of the world scenario. Plus, he's hopped into dozens of different dimensions, so he's the expert among experts here, guys. The Author's Bunker is secretly hidden away underground and contains a bunch of different rooms that were extremely fun to build. A few that may translate a bit weird in Animal Crossing, but fun nonetheless. The rooms we will be building today are as follows: the bomb shelter, the security room, the observation deck's secret room, the hidden lab, and the creature's den. The Author's Bunker is an important place in the show, and it honestly just looked like a super fun home to design. Plus, I like Ford, and I thought it would be nice to build a space that was 100% his own. I mean, technically the shack is his own home, but it's been stanified over the years. Okay, let's head on in and start this awesome build. Alright, we are going to be building each room in the order that we see them in the show, starting off with this room, which will be the bomb shelter. When Dipper, Mabel, Wendy, and Seuss first stumble upon the Author's Bunker, the bomb shelter is the first room that they walk into. This room consists of your typical doomsday prep, a bed, weapons, food, water, and so on. It's smaller and more compact in the show, but I still made sure to continue the apocalyptic feel with the additional items I added to the space. Okay, let's begin with walls and floors. The walls of the shelter are curved, dark, and have a bunch of bolts in between the panels, which indicates to me that this is a type of sheet metal or something similar. And so I decided to go with the brown shanty wallpaper. I like the color, and I want to keep that brown orangish tone that we see from the show. The flooring in the shelter looks like it's a tile flooring, and each tile is a bit mismatched with the one next to it, and the flooring seems dirty and a grayish brownish tone. And so I went with this terracotta flooring design. Again, I think this choice will look good later on, as I want this space to have a bit of a orangish warm glow to it, so the orange in the tiles will help achieve that look. Okay, let's add our first batch of furniture to the room, and I'll quickly discuss why I chose each piece. Let's start with the bed. There's a simple looking bed in the bunker that looks rather uncomfortable and flat, and it's on a simple wooden bed frame. In front of the bed, we see a green cabinet that says weapons on it, so I customized one of the wardrobes with this dark green color to stand in for that. Next, I'm going to section off this space with these two brown dressers. You see a giant shelf with a bunch of boxes with various years written on them, and I felt like the dresser mimicked that design rather well. I added two since this room is quite large, and it will allow me to add more items on top, but this dresser is up against the opposite wall in the show. At least it looks like it is. And thus, everything on the right of these two dressers, where the bed and the green cabinets are located, are designed to look like the show. Everything on the left of the dressers I added to spruce up the space a bit and to add a bit more storytelling. In front of the dresser, we see a metal pipe hanging from the ceiling, so I added a set of metal pipes. And you see a few more pipes scattered around the bunker, so I added two more in random spots around the room. On the left side of the room, I added an iron shelf full of tools and boxes, stuff with things you'd most likely need at the end of the world, a medicine cabinet, something that I think completely fits in with the rest of his apocalyptic stash, a simple metal table, and a rolling tool cart. Final item, I added a simple brown storage closet near the doorway. There isn't anything against the wall that I can see in the show, which is why I wanted to add something to fill in the empty space, and I liked how this cabinet looked. Alright, let's add our next batch of items, which will consist of barrels and boxes. Exciting stuff. First, I'm going to add a green barrel in front of the pipes by the entrance. When Mabel walks into the bomb shelter, she sees an open barrel by the entrance, sticks her little head inside and is shown to have a bunch of fuzzy bugs on her face, which we'll add later. I added a barrel next to the cabinet against the wall and scattered a few crates nearby, as we do see some crates on this side of the room with cans of food on top. So I placed 2 near the bed and the entrance. I placed another barrel on the left-hand side of the room, and I'd like to think it contains emergency food like grain or perhaps even water. I added another metal barrel and placed it next to this medicine cabinet, and placed another crate in front of the barrel near the entrance. We see a box in place of the crate, and it's full of canned food, but I like the crate better as it helps to block off the left side of the room better than a box would, as it's taller. Plus, I'll stack some cans on top of it in just a bit. Okay, I think that's all of the larger items. Next, let's add some of the smaller, detailed items in the room. First, I'm going to add a stack of sweaters onto the table. Ford wears turtlenecks, so sweaters seem up his alley. Next to the sweaters, I placed a chessboard as a nod to him playing chess with Bill, but also a brainiac like him would need to keep his mind sharp during trying times, and chess seems like something that would entertain him. I then placed some canned food on top of the crate by the door, as you see a bunch of canned food in his room, and added a fire extinguisher on the tool cart for emergency purposes. And next to that item, a simple gas canister, another item that would come in handy. On top of the iron shelf, I added an emergency generator, placed some bagged items on top of the medicine cabinet, which I imagine contain food, coal, or something similar in nature. And next to the bags, a few bottles to add to the stockpile of food and resources in the room. All right, now for the items on top of the dressers. In the show, we see Dipper look up at the shelves that are in place of the dressers in the game, and we see a jug of water, a simple box, and what looks like a toolbox or some sort of box with a lock on it. It's a bit hard to make out. So to mimic that as much as possible, I added a green water cooler, a simple box with papers and tape inside, and a red toolbox. And for the last item on the shelf, I added a little camp stove. Could come in handy, you know. Next, I added a simple bottle of water to the left side of the room. Water is a resource you definitely want to stock up on. And I added an old radio on top of the green storage closet, as you do see an old brown radio placed on top. Since there is a bunch of empty space near the storage closet, I placed an old stack of books nearby, since you do see some books on a hanging shelf near that area. A few more items to place. We have 2 lanterns, a red and a green lantern. In the show, there is a red lantern on the crate next to the bed, and I added the green lantern to add more light to the space, as it seemed useful to have more than one lantern. I added some more cans of food on the last remaining crate, since we see cans of food everywhere in the bunker, and I added 3 centipedes in the room to stand in for the fuzzy bugs that Mabel finds in the barrel near the entrance. So I'll go ahead and place the fuzzy bugs in that area. Next item I added was a stack of toilet paper. No need for explanation, guys. This to me would be a need during an apocalypse, an important necessity to stock up on, as we have learned in 2020. And on top of the brown storage closet, I placed even more books, perhaps important references Ford would need during trying times. Last few items to place include these open cans of food. We see quite a few open cans of food throughout the episode, and it plays an important part towards the end with the shapeshifter. I added them near the bed and the entrance, as that's where we see the open cans of food on the floor. Finally, I added an old pair of boots near the bed, indicating this space has been occupied at one point. All right, that was a lot. Next, we're going to add some ceiling items. There aren't too many to add. I added a hanging shelf above the bed, since we see a hanging shelf in this exact spot, although it doesn't have dishes on top of it, but you know, I'm working with what I'm given here, so it's fine. I also added a simple hanging enamel lamp, as we see one near Ford's bed in the show, and this caution sign I added above the door to our next room. I'd also like to think this sign can stand in for the fallout shelter sign that's hanging on the wall, as I wasn't able to find anything to stand in for that. Final bit of items will be the wall items. We're almost done, I promise. For our first wall, I added a simple breaker to reset the power to the bunker when needed, a security camera, as we know there are security cameras in a few of the rooms, so it seemed fitting. I also added a simple iron shelf to add some height to the area, a few spider webs to show how long this place has gone untouched, and the last 2 items, a map and a ventilation fan. The wall map that we see in this area in the show is hiding a secret passageway to the next room, so I wanted to add it next to the doorway. And we see a large ventilation fan above the map in the show, so I went ahead and added the fan right above the map. For our second wall, I simply added 2 shelves with bottles on top to add as more emergency food or medicinal storage, and 2 clothing items that I think would be useful, as I could see Ford owning them, some night vision goggles, and a welding mask. Moving on to the third wall, where I simply added another cobweb, a gas mask, which we do see hanging up on this wall, and a tool board, which I feel makes up for the weapons in the storage closet we don't get to see. And it also fills out the space. On the final wall, I added another security camera. You need to cover every angle if you're trying to secure a place. I also added a few posters of fish and bugs. Who knows? Maybe they'll have gone extinct and these posters will be rather educational, or perhaps a sad reminder of the current state of the world. Finally, I added a place to hold all of Ford's keys that open up all of his secret bunkers and rooms, and a simple light to illuminate the entrance to the bunker. Oh, and another cobweb. Gotta make sure the room looks dusty and old. Oh my god, okay. We're done with the items. This room was the bulkiest of all the rooms, but still, that was a lot of talking. Okay, now let's turn the lights off so the bunker looks cold and unused. And it looks so cool with just the lanterns illuminating the space. And with that, we are finally done with this room. I really love how the room came together. I think it looks pretty close to the bomb shelter from the show, and I managed to add a pretty decent amount of items from the room in the show. For a room meant to hide in during an unprecedented disaster, it looks pretty cozy, and it has everything you could possibly need to survive. Ford seems pretty satisfied. Okay, let's move on to our next room build. Our second room build will be the security room, and it's the second room we see in the show. Dipper and the gang climb through the small pipe they find behind the map in the bomb shelter room, and it leads them to this tiny room full of blocks and symbols. Although, once they step on a symbol, the room locks them in, and the blocks inch closer and closer, pinning them in, leading them to solve the puzzle to escape. So essentially, this room is just a bunch of different colored blocks, but I figured I could try to create it. Consider it a break from our last room build, and this one is rather short. Okay, let's start with the walls and floors. Both the walls and floors are individual metal blocks that are rusted, giving it a more brown look than silver. So I decided to go with brown walls and floors, as I'd prefer the room to be darker anyways. For the wall, I chose the brown botanical tile wallpaper. I like that the design was displayed in boxes and the floral designs could help stand in for the symbols on the walls. And the same thought process was used for the flooring when I chose the spooky flooring option, trying to keep with the block theme here. All right, and for our items, we are using a ton of the cube lights, both floor lights and hanging lights. Most of the lights will be red, as the symbols on the blocks turn red when they accidentally activate the security protocol in the room, but I'll add a few blue blocks as well, since these blocks turn blue when the correct symbol is pressed. I'm just gonna go around and scatter them throughout the room, attempting to make a little pathway so we can walk around a bit in this space. And yeah, I'm just trying to make it look a bit interesting, I suppose. Again, it's nothing special, but I wanted to include every room in the bunker, and this is one of them, as simple as it may be. All right, that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to do the same on the ceiling with the hanging cube lights, adding mainly red lights with a few blue thrown in. I want to do my best to make the room feel full and claustrophobic. Basically, I want to recreate the feeling of impending doom that Dipper, Mabel, Seuss, and Wendy were feeling. Okay, I am done placing the blocks. It doesn't look that bad in my opinion. Next, I'm going to change the lighting and add a bit of a red hue to the room, since we have red lights everywhere and it just looks better that way. I like the feeling the red light brings to the space. And finally, I decided to add the space soundscape to the room, mainly because it was too quiet, but it also adds a bit of eeriness. It's kind of fitting. All right. My room full of blocks is completed. I don't have too much commentary to add to this room, but if you see the show, I think you can appreciate it a bit. At least you know what I was attempting to recreate. A weird room to this degree isn't all that weird when it comes to Ford, and it's not the only weird room in the bunker. So let's continue onwards to the third room that we find after escaping this hellscape of a security room. Alright, we are moving on to our third room, which our curious adventurers find after making it out of the security room, and we'll be building it in this room to the right, so let's head on in. Our third room is known as the observation deck, and it functions as a workspace and an area to observe the mysterious creatures Ford has hidden even further underground. This area has equipment that looks rather old and almost similar to what you'd find in his secret lab at the Mystery Shack, which makes me think that it was built close to the same time. There's a bunch of equipment, recorders, and monitors, basically a room full of old electronics. There are quite a few items in this room as well, but nothing compared to the first room. It's a tad less than that. Let's start with the walls and the floors. In the screenshots, we can tell that the walls are also a metal type of material, and while it's dark in this space as well, they seem a tad more silver, so I decided to go with the gray shanty wallpaper this time. I also added an accent wall, the server room wallpaper. I feel like it helps to solidify the fact that this is an important room with a bunch of important data and science going on. Basically the heart and soul of the bunker operations. Okay, and for the floors, I chose this dark brick flooring as the floors are a darker tile color and I thought it looked nice. Plus, we're going to dim the lights later on, so I wanted the floors to be a bit darker than the walls. Next, I'm going to add all the items to create our tables, equipment, workspace area. The whole room is basically taken up by 2 long workstations with a bunch of electrical equipment, and they are rather bulky looking. So I figured I can try to recreate the large workstations by combining these metal lockers with the metal desks. That way I can add some items on both surfaces to try and give a bit of height to the space, as the workstations are large vertically. You also see 2 red chairs, one next to each workstation, so I went ahead and added them to the room as well. There are a few more pieces of furniture to fill up the room, and these are simply items I felt would fit in well with the space. I added a gray filing cabinet so Ford can store all of his important research, a shelf full of glowing jars, as we see a shelf full of beakers in the room, so I thought this would be a good fitting replacement, and a chalkboard full of calculations and science mumbo jumbo, a fitting addition to this research facility. Okay, now we can add all of these smaller detailed items to the room. First, I added a siphon and placed it on top of the shelf with the glowing jars. You see a lot of beakers and empty glass jars in the room, so I felt like this was a fitting item. And next to the siphon, I added a few books. On the workstation, I placed 2 old TVs to stand in for all the monitors you see in the room. And on this desk, I decided to add 2 filing boxes, which I'm sure contain a bunch of important information. I added another pile of books onto the desk. Ford has a bunch of books, so I like the idea of adding some more. A camera to document his findings. Although now that I'm thinking about it, that may be a bit too high-tech for this room given the time period it was built. Perhaps I'll switch it out to something else. On top of the filing cabinet, I added a pink jar, a specimen of sorts, alongside a box of junk. On the opposite table, I added the monitors and 2 old-timey recorders, as we see a bunch of recording devices similar to these hanging around the room. This metal briefcase is taking the place of the author's laptop that they find in this very room, which looks very much like a briefcase, which is why I decided to go with this item instead of the laptop item. And I added 2 of the sampler items, one for each desk, as it looks like the control hub of the workspaces, as it contains a bunch of buttons and dials, which we see all over the workstations. So I really loved incorporating this item into the room. You also see a microphone on one of the workstations, alongside a clipboard that says that the shapeshifter has become too dangerous and is placed in cryogenic stasis. To which Mabel freaks out because she shoved her brother and Wendy in that room. Maybe I can try to customize the clipboard to look more like text instead of a checklist, but I made sure to add it. The last desk item I added was a reference sheet that I believe could stand in for a blueprint for something Ford was in the middle of building. From there, I went ahead and turned on the TV monitors, each showing a different image to add some variety. And I added another metal pipe to go towards the back of the room to keep with the theme throughout the bunker. Also, this corner of the room has a bunch of electrical boxes and such, so it helps fill in the space. All right, let's move on to the wall items. The first wall, I went ahead and added 2 little shelves, as we see a few shelves in this corner of the room. I added some webs, as this room is dusty and contains a few webs throughout, a breaker box for all the electrical equipment, and another set of hanging keys above one of the desks. For our next wall, I simply added 2 ventilation fans above the electrical towers to help with airflow, as seen throughout the bunker, and for a bit of background noise. The third wall, I added another surveillance camera and a poster of various constellations. Seems a bit fitting to add some posters about space in the universe. I also added a bulletin board above the workstation so he can better keep track of his research. And for the final wall, I added another surveillance camera, some more cobwebs, an intercom Ford can use for more communication, perhaps for people trying to sneak into the bunker, some musty old bottles, and this blue spotlight above the door. You see a blue light above the door leading to the next room, and I wanted to incorporate that light in some manner, so I decided to place a blue spotlight above the entrance, and I think it looks nice. Okay, let's move on to the ceiling, and we only have a few items to add. I placed 4 fluorescent lights above the tables, just to add a bit of lighting, and I dimmed the lights a bit as we don't see much lighting in this room when we discover it in the show. From there, I added some music because I wanted one of the rooms to have some music, and I feel like a classical piece of music is something Ford would listen to while working, so hey, why not? And finally, I added this caution sign above the pipes. You see a little caution symbol on one of the breaker boxes in this area, and honestly, I feel like this whole bunker could use caution signs whenever possible. And with that, we are done with the observation deck. Just like Ford's secret lab in the Mystery Shack, this room was a bit hard to design because the equipment in both rooms are so specific looking and so unique that it's truly a challenge to find a way to recreate that space, especially when the old equipment is the focal point of the room. But I think it turned out pretty nice, and you can definitely tell this is a place of work and discovery and some other unspeakable experimentation, I'm sure. I like the overall vibes, and the dim lighting brings a nice touch to the room. Okay, let's move on to our 4th room build. Alright, moving on to our next room, we will be using the last available room on the 1st floor, so let's make our way over there and begin designing. The next room Dipper and his friends stumble upon is the observation deck's secret room, which Mabel shoves Wendy and Dipper inside, and it's basically like a small closet with a room with a shower head and a ton of air vents. And it acts as like a sanitation chamber before leading to the 5th area. So yeah, we're kind of building a glorified shower. It's a simple room, like the block room, but way simpler. But you know, I wanted to add every room, and that includes this little space. So let's begin. The room itself is very dark, and from what I can tell, the walls and floors use tiles throughout. So I added dark brick walls to mimic the rectangular dark tiles. And for the floors, I simply chose an old looking tile flooring. It works well considering this room will have water running constantly. Alright guys, every item I used is a wall item. So there are only 2 shower heads and ventilation fans. When Wendy pulls the string hanging from the ceiling, it activates a shower, and shortly after, all the vents on the side of the walls dry them off. And there are a bunch. So I added 3 shower heads simply to fill up the walls because it's a rather large room. And I added 9 ventilation fans to stand in for the air jets on each side of the room. I used copper shower heads and orange ventilation fans because the room is going to have a red glow to it, as it's shown in the show as well. And I feel like the orangish colors of these 2 items will look better with the red light than just plain white or silver. And I think it looks nice. The red gives it a bit of a spooky vibe as well, which I love. A freaky, weird shower in a weird, freaky bunker. Finally, I added some rain soundscape to the room to enhance the shower sounds. And there we go. A very simple, yet confusing room if you've never seen the show. There's not much to really comment on, but You know, I'm glad I added this little area. This will be the second room in the bunker that's rather confusing once you enter, but perhaps the bunker isn't supposed to make sense to anyone other than Ford. Every room is there for a reason, and this room exists so all the nasty people in the world don't contaminate his bunker, and most likely to not contaminate the specimens in the room we will be designing next. So let's go ahead and move on to room number 5. All right, the next room we come across is the hidden lab, and we will be building this room down in the basement, so let's head downstairs. Our next room is the hidden lab, and Dipper and Wendy are given access to this room once a door is revealed in the previous secret room. This room, as the name implies, is a hidden lab that Ford has used to observe the shapeshifter, and we see a bunch of broken equipment, cryopods, and other equipment down in this room. It was a pretty fun room to build, so let's begin. I am so in love with the wall choice for this build, and I went with the glowing moss cave wall. You see a bunch of caverns, holes, and tunnels in the lab space, as we come to find out the shapeshifter burrowed and created these tunnels. And this wallpaper has a bunch of caverns and tunnels, which I was going for, and it looks awesome. And for the flooring, since we are underground, I chose the dig site flooring. I really like the texture of the dirt, and the dino skull gives it that feeling that we are deep underground, which I really like. Okay, let's add some furniture to the room really quickly. And first, I'm going to add a single science pod to the right side of the room, alongside this space console, which will stand in for the broken piece of equipment and broken science pod we see in this area. Next, we see a bunch of science pods lined up against the wall, and I decided to add 3 of them. We see 4 in this section, but I didn't really have enough space to add 4, so 3 works well. We have a few simple items to scatter around the room, starting with a few barrels. The old rusty barrels seem to fit well down here. Perhaps they contain fuel for some of the equipment in the room. I also added some metal pipes throughout the room, as there are a bunch of pipes shown in the hidden lab. Scattered a few large rocks throughout, as the space we are in is still quite rocky. And finally, added this artisanal bug cage. We see a giant cage in the show that is destroyed, suggesting something large broke out of it at one point. And I didn't really know how to recreate that, and this artisanal bug cage was the closest cage I could find, and it fits well in the room, so there we go. I included a cage. Next up, we need to add a gyroid to stand in place for the shapeshifter. At the end of the episode, the shapeshifter takes the form of Dipper before he is frozen, with his arms in a funny yet crazy position. And since we see that he is a white color originally, I felt this gyroid fit the description of the shapeshifter quite well. A white blob with the funny arm poses. We'll plop this guy in the middle pod, and he looks pretty good. And since the only active pod is the one with the shapeshifter inside, I'm going to turn the other pods off along with the broken tech console. I wish this also turned the blue color off on the inside as well, but it's fine. I'm going to add some effects to the middle pod to show that it's the active pod as well, to give it that freezing effect I'm going for. And I like how it looks. Okay, let's add a few more items to the room, and in order to add more interest, I'm going to add a ton of vine garlands. You actually do see some of the roots sticking out from the ceiling in certain screenshots, and I figured they could also take the place of some of the wires and pipes we see on the ceiling as well. Plus, it helps give the impression that this room hasn't been used for a while, as plants have overtaken this space. I'm also going to add a few fluorescent ceiling lights, since we see a few lights hanging from the ceiling in the show. The last 2 items are just 2 security cameras, as we know a few exist in this room based on the monitor footage we see in the observation room. For the final touch, let's add a light blue hue to the room, as the room in the show has a bit of a lighter blue color to it, and I really love how cold it makes the room feel. And with that, we are done. I love how this space turned out. It was honestly so fun to build, and it's a rather simple room as well, yet it enhances the spookiness of the bunker quite well. I also just love the detail of the gyroid added in the pod with the cold fog draping off of it. It all comes together really well. You can definitely tell that this is the room where all of Ford's experiments and observations occurred, and it makes you wonder what the other 3 pods were used for. Ford will never say, so I guess we'll never know. Okay, we have one last room to build, and it's a bit of an extension of this room, but with less technology. So let's head upstairs and begin our last room build. All right, our last room we will be building is the creature's den. This room is sort of a bunch of different areas, basically all the tunnels created by the monster, and I'm combining bits and pieces of each part of the tunnel network to create this space. So I'm just creating another little den underground with important items that reference the episode and all the happenings in the tunnel system. Let's begin, and I'm using the exact same wallpaper and flooring as the previous room, since the spaces are interconnected, meaning that you would have to have entered one of these tunnels to have reached this room. Let's add all the items to the room, and there aren't too many items, mainly a bunch of nature decor to help fill out the space. I'm starting out with a few wooden logs with some mushrooms attached. The caves are very wet, so I'd imagine there'd be some mushrooms growing around the area, and I added some of the mushroom seeds and smaller mushroom items to scatter throughout the room as well, to add some variety. I also added a bunch of rocks of all sizes since we're in a tunnel system, so that also just makes sense. For the room's important items, I first added a journal, which we see Dipper hand to the shapeshifter to read, as he claims he's the author of the journals. I also added 2 cans of the open food that we first found upstairs on the ground in the bomb shelter room, which makes Dipper and Wendy realize that this guy is actually the monster and not the author, as they discover he's been taking on the form of the man on the canned food label this whole time. Another important item I added to this room was Wendy's axe, which she uses to strike down the shapeshifter in the tunnels, so I wanted to make sure to add that important item in this room as well. Last major item I forgot to add, which is an important one, is, you guessed it, another metal pipe. But it's important in this room. We see a water line pipe dripping, and the crew tries to turn it on in order to push the shapeshifter away from them, but it takes Wendy in the process, and then Dipper has a little moment, which is sad but cute. So as it is an important item used to defeat the shapeshifter, I needed to add it. I also added a few creepy crawlies around the room, the same ones found in the bomb shelter. I thought it would be fun to add them. Alright, now we're moving on to the ceiling items, and it's basically just the same as the previous room, minus the lights, just a bunch of vines scattered throughout. It makes the simple space a little more interesting in my opinion, and again, we see roots and plants hanging in the rocks above in the show, so it's quite fitting. And on the walls, I added a simple spider web. I mean, why not? Spiders exist in caves and tunnels. Okay, let's turn on the lights and add a blue light to this room like the last one. And it's a bit darker considering there is no other light source, but that's what you'd expect in a tunnel underground. I also added the echo soundscape to make the room feel larger. And finally, I'm going to turn on the metal pipes and add the drip effect to show that this is a water pipe that's about to burst, just like in the episode. All right, I think that just about does it. We have completed the 6th and final room in the author's bunker. While this room is rather simple, I really like the final results. It feels like you're deep underground in a cave, and the little details I added from the episode paint a picture as to what's happened or what's going to happen. It has that eerie feeling I was going for, and it's the perfect last room for this build. I'm not sure if Ford was ever around to see the tunnels being built, but I'm sure he'll be happy to explore them now that the shapeshifter is contained once again. Let me know what you guys think about all the room designs, and as I say in every one of my builds, if you have any suggestions on how I can improve each of the room designs, I'd love to know your thoughts and ideas. I do tend to miss some details and references from the show here and there, since there is so much to go through. Same with the item catalog in Animal Crossing, as it's ginormous. So any feedback would be wonderful. This build was an absolute blast, and I have a cool idea on how to hide the house to make it look like it's underground on the island. So we'll see if I can actually make that work or not. Our 7th Gravity Falls build is going to be the Valentino Funeral Home, where Robbie and his overly bubbly parents live. And then we only have one more major home to build, and we can start with the exteriors of the island and the villagers' homes. I am still deciding whether or not I should make the villagers' homes a surprise, or if I should film the design process. Maybe I'll leave a little something for the island tour. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I will see you in the next video.